P is for Pedo. Back in 2017, the beginnings of a wave rippled on the surface of the internet. From the depths had come wild claims of political and criminal wrongdoings. It quickly became a movement with a rapidly growing body of wild suppositions and predictions, and garnering wackadoo men from across the U.S. and even abroad. And once claims of there being an elite international cabal of pedophiles was put out there, women started joining. A lot of women will get caught up in completely batshit crazy, male-driven movements because of a superficially altruistic message or mission, and or because they've been scared out of their wits, in this case, protecting children from sex predators. Men tend to be more motivated to join groups in order to gain power and wealth, for the opportunity to mete out extra system violence and revenge for imagined transgressions, and or to get recognition or gratitude. So anyhow, this was QAnon, and as quickly as it was built up, it has since lost much of its steam. Personally, I think it wasn't a genuine conspiracy theory, but rather what inevitably happens when you have the perfect storm of capitalism, the internet, testosterone, and religion. The best conspiracy theories, or rather the most worthwhile to consider if you're interested in such things, have actual plausibility that can be fact-checked. And QAnon really had little going for it other than a call to violence appealing to political extremists. Now, the pedophilia focus of the group was strange. It may just have been a ploy to get women involved because, really, you can't take any men seriously when they start accusing other men of sex-related perversions and crimes, pot, meat, kettle, etc., etc. Pedophilia is an everyman phenomenon, not the domain of the rich and famous. It has nothing to do with wealth or education or race or culture, and it has been going on since human time began. And it is perpetrated most often not by faceless strangers waiting for kids in a swimming pool change room, but by the men and boys a child knows, family members, teachers, community religious leaders, and family friends. This is the same mistake that everyone makes about rapists of adult women. They're more likely to be a friend, family member, co-worker, or other male you're familiar with than a complete stranger. But believing in the evil stranger props up the myth that good men exist, that women and girls should trust and get involved with at least some men and boys, and that one's own male family members are innocent by association with you, instead of enabled and given sexual carte blanche by you and other females. So I want to get into a couple of things here. I've touched on related issues in other posts in the past, and see the links down below. First, I'll get into male chronophilia and pedophilia specifically. I'll briefly talk about women who molest children. Then I'll talk about how women aid and abet male pedos through self-feminization, as well as the grooming of their daughters for heterosexuality. And although these seem like opposite purpose behaviors, they actually work together unintentionally. Chronophilia. This was a term used by creepy Kiwi sexologist John Money to refer to male sexual preference for and fixation on specific age groups. Philia is Greek in origin, meaning a friendly affection type of love, and sometimes it is just that. Think of the word Anglophile, for example, which refers to someone who really likes the UK and everything British. But not all philias are safe and innocent, and those involving what men's minds and dicks get up to are anything but. Personally, I think male sexuality, regardless of how socially acceptable or undisordered it is the root of all women's and girls' problems. I see the penis as a weapon of mass destruction with the capability of killing and causing great suffering. And you can disagree all you want, but you can't argue with the statistics on rape and its myriad physical and psychological damage, unwanted pregnancy and its various outcomes, venereal diseases, PTSD, and a whole host of other problems resulting from females having to deal with males' dicks. There is some debate about whether all males are chronophiles. Personally, I don't think this is that important, but if you've read my sexuality series, you'll already know that I consider males to be omnisexual. In other words, all males have at least a tickle of attraction to all sorts of stuff, including children. What they choose to act on and what they choose to suppress and even repress depends on a whole host of factors. There are males who will do anyone or anything, anytime, anywhere, regardless of age, species, or animate status, without a distinct preference. And there are other males who exhibit a socially acceptable range of age attraction, and others still who have a very narrow range of targets, whether socially acceptable or not. The problem is that many males are attracted to age groups that are under 18, while they themselves are adults. While all male-female relationships are inherently power imbalanced and are thus not truly consensual, it is much worse when there are age differences and one of the parties has an underdeveloped brain and body. Men don't seem to see a problem with attraction to teenaged girls, otherwise known as ephebophilia, and have built an entire rape-based industry called pornography and prostitution to legitimize this belief. I have a problem with it, of course, as I think intercourse causes physical and psychological damage to females regardless of age, but especially when young. And then we enter the realms of hebephilia and pedophilia, attraction to early teens and prepubescent children, respectively. Hebephilia was considered acceptable for most of human history, and still is in some cultures, the reasoning being that if a girl is menstruating, then she's fair game for ownership and raping. These days, you still see online discussions among men about whether it's okay to be attracted to a 14-year-old girl. I don't personally understand adult attraction to teenagers and children. It's really hard for me to get into the headspace of a male that sees this as desirable. But if you understand that everything that men do is about power and control, then you can see why dominating the helpless might be desirable. And with that, I'll get into the next topic. What is a pedophile anyway? Now, I learned a few things here as I was digging into the boner-brain connection. The most interesting, but perhaps unsurprising thing to me was that only about half of males who sexually molest children can be diagnosed as pedophiles. Pedophilia, unlike most of the other chronophilias, is a clinical diagnosis of a sexual preference disorder. In other words, being attracted to children is kind of a problem. Yet 50% of child molesters aren't sexually attracted to children. At first, I reread this finding and thought, what the fuck? But then I remembered that the penis is a weapon and that for men, sexual activity is inseparable from acts of violence, hate, and degradation, and a means of exerting power and control, and on some level all males know this. I don't think that any sexual act that a male carries out with unequal parties, meaning women and children, is devoid of power and control and hate and degradation, even if he dresses it up as love. So after that initial what the fuck moment, it made sense. Males assault children to get off and feel power even if they're not attracted to them, just as men sometimes rape adult women they aren't attracted to, but to get off on punishing them for being female and a threat to their ego in some way. Researchers tell us that about 5% of the male population are pedophiles, but these data are based on surveys, so I would have to assume that the figure is higher, as some men aren't going to admit what they like if it's criminal. Likewise with rape. Survey-based studies of college-aged males indicate that a quarter of men would rape a woman if they knew they weren't going to get caught. And that number is likely much higher because a lot of men aren't going to admit something criminal in nature. The message here is that it's impossible to know how disgusting and dangerous men truly are because we rely upon incarceration data and self-report data, and only a minority of sex offenders are actually caught and convicted. I remember visiting a friend in LA one time, and for kicks I decided to look up the neighborhood on the sex offender registry to see how many rapists and pedos lived around me. It was shocking how many red dots appeared on the streets around where I was staying, and then I realized that those dots were only the convicted and released men. Remember that only about 5% of male rapists are ever convicted. Anyhow, liberal men have criticized society for pedo hysteria and have even created entertainment. The British animated series Monkey Dust is an example that pokes fun at those who worry about what men do to those with much smaller voices. While I don't believe in persecuting people without cause, I think women and children should ideally have the option of living apart from males. Of the men who molest children, girls and boys, over 80% of them live heterosexual lives. But some LGBT researchers argue that you can't really identify sexual orientation in pedophiles, but I don't agree 100%. Girls are much more likely to be sexually abused than males, and that difference would not exist if pedophiles did not have an orientation. It may not be an entirely sexual orientation. Sex and harm go hand in hand for males, but it is certainly an orientation that involves hurting girls. 20% of girls are molested, compared to 5% of boys. I think it's probably higher in females, as girls are groomed from birth to accept sexual attention from males, so they are less likely to see what is happening to them as a crime and to report it. While homosexual men are not the group to worry about, there have been a few gay male pro-pedophilia groups, such as NAMBLA in North America and Krümel 13, or the Crooked 13 in Germany, that have advocated for adult-child sexual relationships, decriminalizing child porn, and the like. They are not embraced by the gay and lesbian community, but perhaps have made an impression on simple-thinking right-wingers who may possibly be more likely to be pedophiles than the people they demonize. There has been some effort by left-wingers in recent times to increase the publicity of and search for female child molesters. They are really hard to get a grasp on, though, for a few reasons. They are far less common than male sex offenders. The entire world protects mothers from being seen as perverts and abusers, and child victims are less likely to report sexual abuse from their mothers and female caregivers. So, sample sizes are generally small, and typology models are still under development. But from the data available, two primary types of adult women sexually abuse prepubescent children. The male coerced type, where women assist a male partner in the sexual assault, and the intergenerational predisposed type, where women abuse their own children or children close to them. And these women appear to be almost universally heterosexual mothers or caregivers, although they sexually abuse females more than males. This behavior seems to be less sexually motivated and more a reenactment of sexual and physical abuse they themselves suffered as children. Interestingly, female sex abusers tend to be more physically brutal with female victims in addition to the molestation, and serious injuries are much more likely with girls and with younger victims than with boys or pubescent and teenaged victims. Although researchers seem confused about why this might be, I have a strong suspicion that this is a direct expression of the internalized misogyny that all women grow up with. and women trapped in unwanted caregiving roles with girl children are possibly tapping into repressed rage from their own childhood abuse. It seems logical that female abusers would see a young girl as a proxy for the hated self and punish the girl accordingly. Admittedly, much more investigation is needed to understand the prevalence of and motivation for female sex abusers and the damage they do to girls. Generally speaking, I think mothers are far too protected as it is, and I am no fan of seeing breeding as a human right. I think being born to a sane and loving person is the human right we need to be more concerned with. If you are a severely damaged person, you have no business being around children, let alone creating your own punching bags and fuck toys. I still remember back to my time in China, and I saw plenty of public child abuse. But it was only ever mothers slapping, punching, kicking, and using makeshift weapons on their small girl children. It was shocking, and I was the only one who seemed to notice. Never once did I see anyone, mother or father, hit a boy. Of course, I saw plenty of adult males physically abusing adult females in public, but not children. I see from crime data that males are much more likely to abuse and sexually abuse children, especially girls, but perhaps they save it for the privacy of the home since they are seldom out and about with children on their own, unlike women. And although fathers aren't as protected as mothers from suspicion of abuse, society generally accepts male violence as the way things are. If we put a few token male rapists in jail, we can all feel like we're addressing the problem, even though we're not. But maternal child abuse, including molestation, needs to be addressed in a more serious way. Aiders and abettors. I wanted to briefly address a more common female contribution to pedophilia, and that is feminization, the pursuit of youth, and the grooming of daughters. I talked about much of this in my 2017 post, Thanks for Supporting Pedophilia, and I'll include the link below. My theory is that instead of aging naturally and normally, adult women engage in a whole host of practices, aka practicing femininity, designed to chase youth and cater to male pedophilic, hebephilic, and ephemophilic proclivities. Women remove their body hair, try to stay thin and unmuscular, dye their hair, coat their faces in makeup to look younger, and dumb down the tone and content of their speech in an effort to look more childlike and to keep men's attention. And increasingly, mothers groom their daughters for male attention by allowing them to dress age inappropriately and femininely, to wear makeup, and they tend to punish assertive and aggressive behavior. Consequently, the lines between adult and child are increasingly blurred, and all of this is for male attention. Without males, females have no need to engage in any of this feminizing and infantilizing behavior. I'm going to conclude with the following. If I had a daughter, and I feel thankful every day that I don't have children, here is my list of threats to her safety in descending order. Straight and bisexual men. Despite entertainment propaganda that they are the only protectors of the weak that we can rely on, they are actually the greatest threat to women and girls, and you engage with them at your own and your daughter's risk. All teenaged boys. In some ways, they are worse than adult men simply because they are more likely to target children than adult women for victimization, but their worlds are smaller and their access to people is more limited, and they may be marginally more monitored than adults. It's a fine line, though. All boy children. Many are sadistic with impulse control problems, but they are uber protected by boy moms because of their supposed innocence. You'd be surprised how often little boys commit sex crimes, though. Straight and bisexual women. While they are much less likely to commit sex crimes than men, as I mentioned, straight women who sex offend tend to be much more physically brutal with girls in addition to molesting them. In addition, straight women are male pedophile enablers, especially if they are boy moms or women in committed relationships with men. Straight women will sometimes participate in molestation with their partner, but most often will just cover up or pretend the crimes aren't happening. In some cases, women will trade their daughters' bodies for a place to live, despite there being lots of help for single mothers in Western countries. Gay men. They are not so much a sexual risk to girls, but gay men are misogynist too. I'll bet they're probably less dangerous to girls than, say, boy moms, though. Lesbian and separatist women. The only risk they pose is any internalized misogyny they have from growing up in and living in a toxic anti-woman world, but by and large, they are the safest people for girls to be around. So, like the right-wingers of QAnon and various religious groups around the world, do we need to lose our shit in the quest to root out pedophilia in all tribes but our own? No. The sexualization and abuse of children, especially girls, is part of a much larger problem called male domination. And separatism is a more logical place to put your energy and a better investment for your daughters.